In July 2015, FIFA held a press conference to announce the latest decisions regarding the host countries for the World Cup. A mysterious man walked up to the stage, stood in front of the president of the World Football Federation, Sepp Blatter, and threw money at him, declaring that this was campaign money to support hosting the world's biggest football festival in North Korea. The man was immediately removed from the press conference, but the image of Sepp Blatter with money falling around him became a symbol of the corruption within FIFA, highlighting the relationship between those in power and green bills. The scandal, which had been unfolding within FIFA for over 20 years, was exposed in early 2015, becoming one of the biggest corruption cases in the history of world sports. 11 senior officials of the federation were jailed on charges of fraud, corruption, and money laundering. President Sepp Blatter was forced to resign and was banned from sports-related activities until 2027. Additionally, a large-scale investigation was launched into the World Cup set to be held in Qatar in 2022. So, what exactly happened within FIFA? Where did the roots of corruption begin? And was Sepp Blatter truly innocent in all these scandals? The rise of Sepp Blatter. To truly understand what has happened and is happening at FIFA, we must turn back to a time long before the World Football Federation was established in 1904 by various football associations from Europe. These associations joined forces to form a unified organization dedicated to organizing football tournaments and events. At that time, the members of these associations were amateurs who dedicated their efforts to their love and passion for football. Despite FIFA being a small organization with no financial resources, football continued to be loved, developed, and gradually exploded over time. In 1971, the then president of FIFA, the famous English football manager Sir Stanley Rouse, was challenged by João Havelange, who would later completely change the face of FIFA. João Havelange, a former Olympic swimmer and then president of the Brazilian Sports Federation, was one of the most influential figures in Brazil. He recognized the close connection between sports and politics, which was also evident in FIFA. Havelange saw an opportunity within the World Football Federation. He knew that Stanley Rouse had issues with the racial segregation system in Brazil and Africa and their membership status within the organization, which made him unpopular among the people of the Black Continent. They saw Rouse as a representative of the hostile British Empire. Havelange immediately exploited this to gain an advantage for the upcoming FIFA presidential election. To elect the FIFA president, each football association has one vote, meaning there are many votes worldwide. João Havelange realized that to win, he would need substantial support from Africa, which accounted for 30% of the total votes. Havelange promised that if he were elected president, he would invest money and resources to develop sports in third world countries in Africa. To ensure his success, brown envelopes were generously given to delegates at the election held in Frankfurt. Inevitably, Havelange officially took the president's seat, beginning the commercialization of the World Football Federation. FIFA transitioned from a group of Europeans passionate about football to a disguised enterprise. However, João Havelange was not an economic expert. To fulfill his promises made before taking the position, he needed money. FIFA needed money. This was when, in October 1974, Sepp Blatter entered the big leagues. He proposed the idea of collaborating with major brands to develop together. The first target was the beverage giant Coca-Cola. Sepp Blatter, with his suitcase, pitched the idea to the partner and succeeded. In 1976, a press conference announced the official partnership between FIFA and Coca-Cola, with the beverage brand committing to support development programs and youth tournaments. This was the beginning of modern sports sponsorship. This announcement attracted many other brands to FIFA, along with lucrative advertising contracts from companies like KLM Airlines, Philips, Canon, and Gillette. All this happened within the first 4 years of João Havelange's tenure, but most notably, it was Adidas and the influence of its boss, Horst Dassler. Horst Dassler, the German owner of Adidas, had an enormous influence that spanned decades. The partnership between FIFA and Adidas was considered very stable. At that time, the explosion of television technology was immense. Just appearing on the screen meant the whole world would know your brand. Hence, it was not surprising that Adidas did everything possible to secure exclusive sponsorship for the 1982 World Cup in Spain. But that was not enough for Horst Dassler. He wanted to completely control the broadcasting rights for the World Cup matches. He created a company called ISL, which is short for International Sports and Leisure. The final step was the signing. Former President Havelange, who had recently seen a significant increase in his bank account, was involved. As Havelange's secretary and right-hand man, Sepp Blatter knew about his boss's secret dealings. Instead of exposing Havelange, Sepp Blatter wanted a share of that lucrative pie. The entire FIFA family knew what was happening, but nothing could stop the corruption deep within the organization. João Havelange was shrewd. Sensing something wrong and feeling unsatisfied, he jumped ship as FIFA president right after the 1994 World Cup in the USA. The race to find a new president began, immediately involving Sepp Blatter and Lennart Johansson, president of the UEFA. Lennart Johansson had a significant advantage with the trust of all of Europe. His campaign aimed to completely cleanse the corruption, indirectly accusing the previous president and hitting Sepp Blatter's sore spot. Meanwhile, Sepp Blatter struggled in this race without considerable support from any region. At this point, two people sided with Sepp. Sepp Blatter was wise enough to know that in others' eyes, he was just an innocent football politician. If someone met that requirement, his support in the federation and among football fans would soar. Luckily, the person who decided to support Sepp was the French legend, the King, Michel Platini, who had won 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors in 1983, 1984, and 1985, along with a World Cup and a European Cup. Meanwhile, Michel Platini was just starting to find his place in football politics after retiring. The two great minds formed what seemed to be a lasting alliance for $1 million. With the external campaign completed, what about the internal one? Applying the same strategy that João Havelange used, Sepp Blatter aimed to overwhelm a region with many votes. In regions like South America, where football powerhouses like Brazil and Argentina were strong, there were only 10 votes. But North, Central America, and the Caribbean had 30 votes. In the complex political situation of this region, Jack Warner, head of the Regional Football Federation, granted the Caribbean islands the independence they wanted, including voting rights for the FIFA president. Regardless of whether it was a big country like Cuba or a small one like Turks and Caicos, Jack had significant influence over the votes there. The person who helped Jack Warner understand the immense importance of the Caribbean region was Chuck Blazer, his right-hand man. Jack relied on Chuck to bring in many television contracts and other benefits, enriching the federation, or more precisely, filling both their pockets. When it came to corruption, no one could match these two. Since each independent Caribbean island had its vote, anyone wanting to be FIFA president had to please or make the people in this region happy. Jack Warner, holding a large number of votes, saw an opportunity to make money in the election, so he bluntly asked Lennart Johansson for money to buy votes. Of course, Europeans didn't play that way, so it was no surprise that Jack Warner made deals with Sepp involving thick envelopes and promises of future profits. The final obstacle was Lennart's support from Africa. Sepp Blatter understood this, so he also aimed to win over Lennart's support. Sepp Blatter promised the president of the South African Football Association, "Give me your choice, and I'll guarantee you a World Cup in South Africa." This promise not only secured the vote from South Africa, but also from 14 other CAF countries. The result? The World Cup in South Africa said it all. Another important ally of Sepp was Mohammed bin Hammam, president of the AFC. He was a wealthy, powerful, loyal, and prestigious Qatari businessman. Sepp recognized his importance. Mohammed bin Hammam also hoped to gain something from the 1998 election, so they teamed up. Mohammed became Sepp's campaign manager. With everything in place, Sepp confidently entered the FIFA presidential election held in Paris, France, with a smug face and brown envelopes handed out to delegates at the FIFA hotel. Many African delegates switched sides just before the vote, and even some European countries betrayed Lennart Johansson. The final result was Sepp Blatter becoming FIFA president, starting a series of collapses that weren't exposed until 2015. The World Cup bidding process, FIFA's goldmine. During João Havelange's era, Horst Dassler's exclusive media contracts with ISL functioned like a bank, essentially acting as FIFA's disguised ATM. However, when Horst Dassler passed away from cancer in 1987, ISL began to falter. In 2001, ISL declared bankruptcy with a net debt of up to $300 million, plunging FIFA into a financial crisis just as Sepp Blatter ascended to the presidency. Sepp faced numerous issues, including corruption allegations related to his relationship with ISL. Michel Zen-Ruffinen, FIFA's general secretary at the time, exploited this to point out accounting errors within the federation in an attempt to oust Blatter in the next election. Blatter denied all allegations, and with Chuck Blazer's support, they deflected accusations back at Zen-Ruffinen, claiming his actions were attempts to divide and sabotage the FIFA family. Financially, FIFA wasn't worried since the money was in Blatter's pocket. How did it get there? Blatter began selling future tournaments, which helped him dominate the 2002 re-election, and immediately retaliated by kicking Zen-Ruffinen out of FIFA. FIFA holds immense power because they control the event rights, compelling countries to strive to host these tournaments. The World Cup finals serve as a prime method for building a nation's global image, offering unparalleled promotional value. For instance, Germany's 2006 World Cup significantly boosted its economy, generating $1 billion in just 1 year and increasing tourism by 5.4% the following year. The World Cup, broadcast in every country, is a lucrative event for FIFA, enhancing the president's power due to its global influence. João Havelange understood this well, and so does his right-hand man, Sepp Blatter, the current FIFA president. When Blatter began his term in 1998, the host countries for the 2002 and 2006 World Cups were already decided. The first country to host in 2014 was South Africa, fulfilling Blatter's promise to garner votes in these regions. In 2009-2010, FIFA started the bidding process for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. The executive committee, comprising 24 of the most powerful individuals in global football federations, including figures like Chuck Blazer and Jack Warner, made the decisions. Consequently, it was difficult for the voting process to be transparent. Just before the vote, FIFA's Ethics Committee annulled the voting rights of 2 delegates from Tahiti and Nigeria for attempting to sell their votes. But these were just 2 among many other exposed cases. Experts viewed England's bid for the 2018 World Cup as the best, and the US's bid for 2022 as the strongest. However, FIFA's late 2010 announcement shocked the world. The 2018 hosting rights went to Russia, which was understandable, but 2022 was awarded to Qatar. This decision surprised not only the media and the public, but also FIFA's executive committee members. Chuck Blazer's shocked expression when the result was announced was akin to seeing the sunset in the west. Sepp Blatter turned to other members, face showing clear defeat, and said, "Get ready, we're in for some trouble." As predicted, FIFA became the focal point of criticism from the media and sports fans worldwide, especially amid bribery allegations. The question on everyone's mind was, why Qatar? Qatar was not the ideal country to host a World Cup. Reports submitted to FIFA highlighted that temperatures there in May, June, and July soared to 42 degrees, unsuitable for football matches. Additionally, the infrastructure was inadequate, with no stadiums, insufficient hotels for tourists, and an inconvenient transportation network. Hosting a World Cup would require almost a complete reconstruction of the country. Compared to the US bid, it was a stark contrast. Thus, when Qatar won the bid for the 2022 World Cup, FIFA became the target of widespread media criticism, epitomized by statements like, "They don't care about football, they don't care about us, all they care about is money." Such criticisms had merit. According to The Guardian, over 6,500 migrant workers died between 2010 and 2020 preparing for the World Cup, mainly from India, Pakistan, and Nepal, averaging 12 migrant deaths per week from 5 countries. This figure could be higher, excluding migrant workers from the Philippines. However, Qatar's official data claimed only 37 out of 2 million migrant workers died. How did Qatar secure the World Cup hosting rights? It was evident they needed the executive committee members' votes. Politically, Qatar sought international recognition to escape Saudi Arabia's shadow. They invested heavily in sports and football to make a mark, despite not having an outstanding national team. They sponsored numerous major events and bought and funded PSG, aiming to host their own World Cup. This ambition was not just Qatar Football Federation's but a national project. Initially, Qatar's bidding team was small, with some members never having watched a World Cup match and lacking experience in bidding for major tournaments. At the 2009 FIFA Media Breakfast event in Cape Town, South Africa, where countries showcased their potential to host the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, Qatar's booth was almost empty. In contrast, England's booth, one of Qatar's major competitors, was swarmed by the media, thanks to David Beckham's presence. Qatar's ace wasn't a media-attracting figure. It was Mohammed bin Hammam, the president of the Asian Football Confederation. Initially, bin Hammam understood Qatar's challenges, like weather and infrastructure. The bidding team took time to convince him to support the project. He knew whom to approach for votes, how to meet them, and what offers to make. Qatar did precisely this, securing votes one by one. In 2010, 10 months before the vote, Qatar agreed to fund the African Cup of Nations in Angola, attended by 3 FIFA Council members. Qatar offered $1 million to support the respective football federations, later raising it to $1.5 million, resulting in friendly handshakes. This event was later reported by Phaedra, a member of Qatar's bidding team, in The Times in December 2010. Qatar denied the allegations and threatened Phaedra with anonymous calls, emails, and social media harassment, forcing her to sign a sworn statement that she lied. She eventually recanted her claims in the Sunday Times. Qatar also engaged in high-level national negotiations for votes, including a significant deal with Thailand, which had a seat on the executive committee. Qatar and Thailand's substantial trade deal occurred just before the vote. Other committee members, like Marriott Lefkaritis, sold land to Qatar for €32 million, denying any influence on their vote. However, the Qatar-France deal was more substantial. Weeks before the vote, UEFA President Michel Platini, influential in guiding European votes, had lunch with French President Nicolas Sarkozy and the Qatari emir's son. Platini was informed it was best for France if he voted for Qatar instead of the US. Consequently, after Platini's vote, Qatar's state fund bought PSG, poured money into it, and signed stars like David Beckham, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Neymar, and Lionel Messi. Major trade deals followed, including Qatar buying Rafale fighter jets worth $7 billion and Airbus planes. Despite these high-level political deals, Qatar maintained their innocence. Chuck Blazer's shock was due to his assumption that the North and Central American Football Confederation would vote for the U.S. However, his ally, Jack Warner, saw Qatar's entry as a payday. Many committee members, likely in their last term, sought to grab all they could, betraying Chuck Blazer for money. Qatar's victory was shocking to the public, but obvious to FIFA's management. Sepp Blatter knew the consequences if Qatar won, so he voted for the U.S. and urged others to do the same to avoid unnecessary attention. He failed, inadvertently causing over 6,500 deaths during Qatar's World Cup preparations. The thirst for power of Sepp Blatter. After the bidding process for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups ended, it was also when Sepp Blatter was nearing the end of his current term. Before his first election, Sepp had declared that he would serve 2 terms, but he went back on his word and continued into a 3rd term, even stating later, according to Michel Platini, he wants to hold on to that seat until he's in the grave, and even then, he wants to be buried with it. Platini was not the only one angered by this. Many believed Blatter couldn't contain his ambitions. During his 13 years in office, Sepp gained fame and recognition worldwide. But not everyone praised his leadership at FIFA. Sepp always demanded loyalty from his followers and supporters. But the problem was that he wasn't loyal to his political allies. Mohammed bin Hammam's case is an example. As we know, bin Hammam was a staunch supporter of Sepp Blatter, extremely loyal and faithful. But to establish that relationship, he wanted the chair immediately after Sepp Blatter's term ended. Then, when Sepp went back on his word, Bin Hammam demonstrated his capabilities and influence by bringing the World Cup to Qatar, which was completely unexpected for Sepp Blatter. It was the first time Sepp realized his limits of power, and of course he couldn't accept that. Immediately, Sepp acted to oust Bin Hammam from FIFA. According to Bin Hammam, in 2009 there was an election in Asia for a FIFA position that I held, and there was another candidate. I was very surprised when Sepp Blatter supported that person. I found it quite strange. I thought we were friends, but he saw me as a threat and wanted to oust me from FIFA. So I thought I would make his life uncomfortable. Bin Hammam then stood for election as FIFA president, directly criticizing Sepp Blatter's leadership and calling for transparency in all FIFA activities. At that time, the media believed it would be very difficult to overthrow Sepp Blatter simply because he had entrenched himself too securely. He used billions earned from World Cups to strengthen his power base, making it challenging for Bin Hammam to confront Sepp openly and transparently. At the CONCACAF Football Association conference held in 2011 in Miami, USA, Bin Hammam wanted to attend to meet representatives from the Miami region in his campaign, but he was inexplicably denied a visa to the US. According to him, "It's as if someone didn't want me there." And it was at this conference that Sepp Blatter announced a $1 million development grant for CONCACAF, still operated by Jack and Chuck Blazer. This action was a blatant provocation towards Bin Hammam, and the Asian Football Confederation president fell into Sepp's trap. After the World Cup bidding, Bin Hammam perhaps established a relationship with Jack Warner, while Chuck Blazer clearly sided with Sepp Blatter. After being sidelined at the Miami conference, Bin Hammam contacted Jack to seek another opportunity to persuade the members. This desire was fulfilled through a congress held in the capital port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, Jack Warner's homeland and power base. All Caribbean football federations were invited to the Hyatt Regency Hotel. Jack Warner himself owned a travel company and was paid $363,000, presumably by Bin Hammam, to organize this trip. Chuck Blazer thought this was inappropriate and fully opposed the event. In a letter likely sent to Jack, he said this event should only be held openly and transparently, not just for the Caribbean region. In other words, Chuck Blazer also wanted a piece of the pie that Bin Hammam was bringing, despite his support for Sepp Blatter. But Chuck didn't want Jack to have it all to himself. Chuck also made some threatening moves, but Jack Warner paid little attention and allowed the conference to proceed as usual. On the first day of the conference, Bin Hammam still presented his plans for FIFA and global football as usual. But there were some strange things. At the end of the presentation, the delegates were reminded of a gift to help the member federations, but it was received discreetly at a hotel property. When the delegates went in one by one to receive the gift, it was a brown envelope filled with cash, specifically $40,000. When a delegate from Puerto Rico questioned what the money was for, those from the Caribbean Football Union said it was for him to use for anything he wanted to do in football. Clearly, the money had been distributed to everyone, most of whom enthusiastically accepted it, with only a few returning their share of the gift. There were even reports of complaints about the distribution. Within hours, news reached Chuck Blazer in New York, and Chuck nearly went crazy, whether because Jack received money without Chuck or just because Jack was corrupt. No one knew. After all, Chuck Blazer had been working with Jack Warner for 20 years, and now that bond was completely broken, and Chuck decided to accuse Warner to senior FIFA officials in Switzerland. Until now, no one can understand why Mohammed bin Hammam could have carried out such blatant corruption, because he was clearly wise and had been sitting on the Asian Football Confederation chair for decades. According to bin Hammam, I had no bad intention to bribe anyone. As for FBI agents, he was encouraged to spend money helping Caribbean countries only to fall into Sepp Blatter's trap. But no matter what, when public opinion looked at it, it was still a scandal no less than that. Both Jack Warner and Mohammed bin Hammam had to endure the consequences of the incident in Trinidad and Tobago, and the person who brought those consequences to them was none other than Sepp Blatter. Sepp used this opportunity as a chance to eliminate his rivals in the race and as president. He offered bin Hammam an exit. If he withdrew from the election, Sepp would not mention the way Qatar won the vote while reducing the penalty for the incident in Trinidad. Bin Hammam had to agree, and the result was that Sepp Blatter continued for another term, this time as the sole candidate capable of handling the sports crisis. As for Bin Hammam and Jack Warner, both were suspended from FIFA. Bin Hammam left quietly, but Jack Warner told the media, "A tsunami is coming to FIFA. The authorities just don't know it yet." Ultimately, Blatter needed to be stopped. Shortly thereafter, Jack Warner resigned voluntarily without FIFA pursuing him. After the scandal, the only one who benefited completely was Chuck Blazer. The two men who could have torn Chuck's piece of cake have now failed, and Chuck himself is praised by billboards as a hero for exposing corruption within FIFA. But few know that Chuck Blazer was also part of it from the beginning, which is why Chuck Blazer became the first target of the FBI. The accuser. FIFA officials have never been unnoticed, including journalists in England, who focus on the corruption problems within the World Football Association. The most active person is former journalist Andrew Jennings, an experienced journalist in election campaigns. For many years, he tried to expose corruption within FIFA. The FBI began investigating FIFA before the controversial 2010 vote. It's hard for FIFA not to be on the FBI's radar because they've been involved in corruption allegations for a long time. The problem is they don't know which lead to follow or how the organization operates internally, as no one can clearly recount the situation. At this time, Jack Warner wants revenge, targeting Chuck Blazer in particular and FIFA in general. Andrew Jennings is the person Jack Warner contacted to point out Jack's actions. Documents show that Blazer was receiving lavish items he shouldn't have had, such as a beautiful villa in Miami and the Bahamas or a shiny Mercedes in Switzerland. His total assets amounted to $15.3 million with unclear origins. Many of Chuck's checks were continuously sent and received from abroad. All this information was covered in Jennings' series of articles. And in the summer of 2011, these articles attracted the FBI's attention, making them realize who they needed to work with. Catching Chuck Blazer was a very simple matter. They wanted to eradicate the root of the problem within FIFA. They needed something to make Chuck turn informant. So the FBI started digging into Chuck Blazer's files and discovered Chuck had not filed tax returns or paid taxes for 15 years. Not to mention the foreign funds that had to be transferred to a U.S. intermediary bank before being sent anywhere else in the world. So the FBI gradually uncovered all of Chuck Blazer's abnormalities. When the evidence was sufficient, all they needed to do was make Chuck an offer he couldn't refuse. On November 30th, 2011, after leaving his headquarters at Trump Tower, Chuck realized a few things weren't quite normal. He told his assistant to go to the steakhouse first, then got out of the van, got on his scooter, and went to a table where two FBI agents were waiting. He quickly understood his situation. "Mr. Blazer, with all the current charges, you're facing a sentence of 75 to 100 years, but we're here to offer you another choice." It didn't take long for the FBI to get Chuck's cooperation. After the talk, the assistant told Chuck, "Just pay the taxes and everything will be over." He replied, "Marilyn, I'm just a fat fraudster from the Queen. Evil begets evil. Whatever comes, will come." Chuck Blazer wasn't a snitch. He was just a caught criminal who was then exploited to catch other criminals in exchange for a deal to escape or reduce his sentence. Chuck's job was to report to the FBI on where wrongdoing was happening and who to watch. They gave him a keychain with a hidden listening device inside. Whenever he went to dinner with someone from FIFA's leadership, he just had to leave the keychain on the table, and they would take care of the rest. Chuck became a double agent, pointing directly at those who had never been suspected by the FBI, including a key figure, Jack Warner, or more specifically, his sons. They laundered money for their father worldwide, especially in the US. It was no surprise when the FBI quickly arrived and arrested everyone except Jack, as he was a high-ranking government official in Trinidad at the time, and the FBI had no authority to arrest him on the spot. While agents were handcuffing Jack's sons, an FBI agent quickly approached Jack and whispered in his ear, "This is an opportunity for your sons to avoid charges." But contrary to expectations, Jack Warner simply said, "I hope they'll find a good lawyer." He didn't help anyone, not even his sons. In such chaotic times, Sepp Blatter quickly appointed another person to the vacant CONCACAF presidency at FIFA's Congress held in Budapest in 2012, promising to reform the federation's machinery. Ironically, the new president, Jeffrey Webb, was even more shameless than Jack Warner. Just as he sat in the presidency, Jeffrey immediately demanded bribes in an unquestionable manner. Illegal evidence against this old man was quickly collected and smuggled to the FBI by Chuck Blazer. But the strange thing here is that no evidence was shown linking this to Sepp Blatter. He continued to do everything to consolidate and demonstrate his power, including opening a Sepp Blatter Academy in Palestine. Those who worked for Sepp all told the media that his ambitions were growing to the point where he couldn't even control the beast within himself. Football continues to develop because it is a spiritual food that everyone needs. FIFA facilitates that. There was a time when he even wanted to grab the Nobel Peace Prize. It's truly shameless, but Sepp himself couldn't foresee the time when his tenure as FIFA president was coming to an end. The empire collapses. The FIFA storm began in 2015, sweeping away all the most influential figures of the organization. First and foremost was Chuck Blazer's confession in a closed trial of the U.S. federal court. The FBI understood that if they made this trial public, it would be an indelible stain on football history. Alongside Chuck, many other figures were captured by the FBI. On May 27, 2015, in Switzerland, the FBI stormed the main hotel of FIFA and arrested 14 high-ranking officials of the organization, including CONCACAF president Jeffrey Webb. 2 generations of football officials were accused of abusing their positions to engage in corruption, fraud, bribery, and money laundering for the organization. These allegations shocked the world, as they are usually associated with criminal organizations like the mafia or global drug trafficking gangs. But now, they were linked to the world's largest football organization. Jack Warner's indictment was also presented. Of course, he denied it, and no verdict has been issued against Jack. Sepp Blatter was not among those arrested. He even won the next election because he was still popular, especially among African nations. He helped lesser-known countries step into the spotlight through football fields. But this turned out to be a slap that made him realize he was not untouchable. All this happened during Sepp's tenure, so it's no surprise he became the face of a corrupt and tainted FIFA. By then, Sepp couldn't play the invisible man forever. His chair began to shake violently, and not long after, he continued to hold office. 6 days after the arrests, even if Sepp Blatter were involved, he could only stay there for a short time. The pressure was too much to bear. He announced his resignation, leaving through the front door of the FIFA headquarters instead of waiting to be thrown out the back door. But for many, this was a way for Sepp to escape responsibility and avoid the threat of being targeted by the FBI. But how long can one evade? The next person eyed for the position Sepp left behind was none other than Michel Platini, UEFA president at the time. Everyone trusted in Platini's integrity, at least until this image leaked. The image of Sepp Blatter and Michel Platini conducting transactions seemed less than above board. In 2011, just before Sepp won another re-election, a sum of 2 million Swiss francs was transferred from FIFA to Platini. The FBI had long been itching with Sepp. All they needed was a pretext, and this couldn't have been a more suitable pretext. The situation was truly dire for Platini, as the government immediately launched an investigation against Sepp Blatter. But the question is, who leaked all this information? No one knows. Theories suggest Sepp leaked this information to sabotage Platini's current deal. That's why Platini severely criticized Sepp on all media, calling him a traitor. Ultimately, FIFA's ethics committee suspended both Platini and Sepp from all FIFA activities for 90 days pending investigation. By December 2016, both were convicted of ethics violations and banned from participating in football-related activities until 2028. After 16 years of reign, Sepp Blatter's golden age came to an end. After both Sepp and Platini lost their chance to hold the presidency at least until 2023, Gianni Infantino, then UEFA General Secretary, quickly stood for election and won. By then, Platini realized Infantino was no longer his ally. For a long time, Infantino had strong support from Russia and Qatar, and he also retained the right to host the World Cup in these countries from the time of Sepp Blatter. In 2021, after accusing more than 50 people, FIFA was declared a victim of football corruption and was compensated $201 million by the U.S. Department of Justice. Sepp Blatter and Michel Platini were punished by FIFA's Ethics Committee, but were never indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice. By 2022, Platini and Sepp were acquitted by the Swiss criminal court in relation to the 2 million franc case. Chuck Blazer passed away in 2017 before he could serve his sentence. Jack remains in Trinidad and has yet to be prosecuted by the U.S. government. Of the 22 officials who voted for the 2018 and 2022 World Cup hosting rights, only one remains. It's unclear whether there is corruption within the current FIFA structure, but the events of 2015 remain a wake-up call to anyone intending to distort the meaning of football, the world's king sport.